So now we got a guest, which is cool. Jack Duvall. He's David Duvall's brother. Do you know the golfer?
Is that true?
Yeah.
No.
But that would be cool, right?
Yeah.
He almost won the U.S. Open. He's the president of the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. That's cool. What's that mean?
It means people power.
Yeah?
When people rise up and demand their rights.
What, is that what they did in that movie Gandhi? Which was, by the way, based on a true story, I heard?
In fact, it happened, yeah.
Yeah. But don't a lot of people die doing that?
Well, that's because the British began to shoot Indians.
Yeah, right. Well, won't that happen if your part is nonviolent?
But that's where it gets interesting. If you've got a great strategy and you know how to diffuse repression, there are ways of doing that tactically. Then
it doesn't work. It doesn't work one-on-one, right? Like let's say a guy comes at me with a gun. Me being nonviolent, that would not work ever.
No, I mean, I'm not a pacifist. I think everybody has the right to self-defense if it's the only thing you can do to defend yourself and your family. Absolutely.
But you need a lot of people, so this could happen in Iran, right?
You don't necessarily need lots and lots of people because here's the deal: if I were in a room with like maybe 25 or 50 people.
Yeah.
And I was threatening them with a gun, and I said, okay, I want you to do the following things, otherwise I'm going to shoot you.
Right.
They'd have a choice. They could say, okay, we'll do those things. We don't want you to shoot us. Or if I were convinced that none of them were going to do the things that I wanted them to do, even if I were threatening them with a gun, then the threat of violence wouldn't have any power because it's always a transaction.
Right, but what about just the fun of shooting someone? Like a lot of these people are sadists.
That's another story. Yes, absolutely, and that's what these movements do. Like in Iran, they can, if their tactics are strategic, what they can do is to essentially separate that element from within the military and the police forces, which are interested, like the Basiji in Iran, enjoy beating people up, from regular army people who see themselves as defenders of the public order and the nation's honor and all the rest of that stuff.
Hey, can you tell me about Iran? Because I don't understand anything about it because I don't know anything except what I see on TV.
Well, we had a really interesting and not unique set of circumstances in which the Iranian regime basically stole an election. And
No, but I mean beforehand. Like, remember when the students took over the embassy and all that with the hostages?
That's another story. That was a violent revolt that was actually a stunt that was pulled by an extreme faction of the Islamic Revolution.
So they weren't young students, right? They weren't educated? No, that
was inspired. That was
why are there educated students in Iran? Why would that old guy let that happen?
Well, the old guy, you see, that was already after the Islamic Revolution had succeeded. So the power that sat there was the new leaders of the Islamic Revolution.
Right.
And so that was designed, in fact, to help. It was for internal domestic politics to enable more power to accrue to the extreme part of the regime. And essentially, that's the same thing that we saw earlier this month in Tehran.
But did they have satellites during that Khomeini guy?
No, they didn't, but Khomeini used the technology of the day to get in power, which was audio tapes. They mass-produced audio tapes of his speeches. He was a very charismatic speaker, and hundreds of thousands of those were infiltrated throughout Iran, and many believe that he was the liberator from the Shah.
But what I'm asking is, like those guys, those Ayatollahs, because they're so serious about what they believe and stuff, why would they allow any Western communication to enter the country? Why wouldn't they just be a closed country?
It's the way you do business these days. They don't have a choice. If they don't allow digital media in, they can't function in the real world. They can't make a profit as a regime. So it is a trade-off for them. And those who felt that this election had been stolen and poured into the streets used that same digital media, which was then cranked down by the regime in order to help snuff out the protests, and that phase was successful. But they have to go back to allowing full use because otherwise, as I said, they can't function in the world economy.
The new guy, Khamenei, which sounds suspiciously like Khomeini to me, plus he has a long white beard that looks exactly alike. But wasn't the first guy like real famous, and then this guy was kind of hid in the background and pretended that other guy was powerful?
Yes, Norm, exactly. In fact, this guy was a controversial pick 20 years ago to be the supreme leader because he wasn't a famous cleric. He wasn't regarded as spiritually advanced, and it was kind of a political power play that put him into the seat.
Huh. What do those guys have? What are those guys' powers? Those clerics, those mullahs? Can they talk to God and stuff?
They certainly think they do, and but it's a.
Hey, I'm not going to argue with them.
No, not on that. That's for sure. We can argue with them about the way they're governing their country, depriving people of their rights.
But their beliefs, I strongly agree with.
Pardon me?
Their beliefs, I strongly agree with. I just want them all to know that. Something there's no point being controversial about. I found that.
Yeah. Well, it's. I mean, anything that is supremely serious, as the supreme leader and his machinations are, we have to find some basis to laugh a little bit about it. And
but when that guy stood in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, was he an important person, or was he
symbolically, but not strategically?
He did something though. Something changed within China since he did that.
I mean, I don't think so at the time, but I think that what that taught that regime to invent better ways of keeping control, keeping the lid on. And it also taught the regime that there needed to be a loosening in some direction for the new generations. And so the economic loosening and the turn to free market policies did help to accommodate the rising energies of the next generation.
But the Chinese made a strong point that one guy standing there, man, that ain't nothing if you got a tank. But we got to go, and then we'll talk to you in a little bit, right, Christian?
Jack, if you have the time, we'd like to hold you through the break, is what Norm said. Okay, thanks.
I have no idea. You notice I can't add in one thing?
Why?
All I'm doing is sitting here thinking, what would Dennis ask? What would Dennis's point be? What would his view be? What would his position be?
Oh, yeah. I forgot to do that. Right now?
Yeah, see, they couldn't hear what I was saying. I was trying to be off the air. So that's Norm Macdonald, and this is the Dennis Miller Show.
Give us a call at 866-99-DENNIS. That's 866-99-DENNIS. We're joined now by Jack Duvall, who is president of the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. Welcome to the show. Hey, so he's back. So nonviolence, so tell us about that, because that's a pretty fascinating thing.
Well, when it's used by people that get into the streets, as in Iran, it works if three things happen. If people mobilize in large numbers in ways that really impress the rest of the country as representing everyone's grievances. In other words, if there's a unity to take this action. Secondly, if they put real pressure on the institutions of the state and drive up the cost of repression. And finally,
what is the cost of repression now?
The cost. Well, I mean, it's the cost of.
You can't put a number on it.
Consider this: if you have 1 million people in the streets for 20 days, which is effectively what the Ukrainians did in the so-called Orange Revolution 5 years ago, if you do that, then everybody's working overtime. The cost of doing that to the state goes up. All these authoritarian regimes are incompetently managed. That pressure is extreme, and then people within the security forces begin to say, hey, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for. Is this sustainable? Who's going to win this thing? And then they begin to think, maybe I shouldn't, if I'm beating somebody up, maybe that means that they'll know that I did that when the new group takes power. And you see that over and over again.
If the new group that takes power, so the nonviolent conflict is a political...
It's about power. Yes,
one person's idea, so... that person would be whoever. Ayatollah Khomeini would have been that person.
Well, that person is going to be somebody who the people perceive as representing their grievances, because that's the only way you can mobilize them.
In Iran, it wouldn't be this other character, would it?
Well, the thing about Mousavi was that he was a safe choice because he was within the. He said he would abide by the Islamic State.
Yeah.
He was a moderate. He was reformist. So a lot of people who wanted sort of a soft change could identify with him. But
is there anybody in Iran now? It's like Yeltsin, just a crazy drunk that'll get up and say anything, and the people will get behind him.
Ahmadinejad is a dogmatist. He's and he's not a classic authority. This is a clique. There's been a coup, and the extreme form of the Shiite Islamists in Iran have essentially taken complete control of the state. That's the fundamental political reality of what's occurred, and that is scary.
But is it scary if you do nonviolent confrontation, then what if a guy beheads you? Do you at some point, struggle back?
Hey, sometimes that can work for you, because the more outrageous the repression, the more angry people become, and then there's a fire next time.
Right. So you got to be able to put your life on. It's almost like suicide bombings, except it's actual suicide, not homicide.
In a sense, certainly political suicide. If a regime is too violent, then it really ends up, busting its bank. Because
remember that old dude in the newspaper that set himself on fire?
You mean back in the Vietnam War days?
Yeah.
I certainly do.
Would that guy be the king of all nonviolent protesters, that he had reached this point where he could...
No, because not everybody will do that, and generally the most effective nonviolent action is one that inspires imitation, and
people.
The other people want to do the same thing.
Did you say immolation?
Imitation.
Oh, imitation. I thought you said immolation was hard to... But Todd has a question.
Well, now I'm
for
wondering
you.
if it's a stupid question.
It is a stupid question. It's yours.
Well, you said off the air it was okay, and so did the producer. What about the 9/11 situation, like when they were up in the air? There's nothing nonviolent you can do there to stop that, right?
That's right. Another situation of what I would call...
because there's not mass people. One of the three things you need.
Well, there's 300.
That's not mass, right?
Versus
Jack, am I right?
You could, in a technical sense, I mean, the power of the people in the airplane could overwhelm a small-armed...
And by the way, just let me interject real quickly. I'm not implying that they should have done anything.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying, so asking that question.
I'm saying it's a shame that David Duvall only lost by one stroke. And I think Jack's still feeling it.
Actually, usually everybody asks me, well, do you know Robert Duvall?
Oh, Robert Duvall, yeah.
He's the guy. Actually, he had a brother whose name was Jack, too, and that guy I did know.
Oh, really? So you knew Robert Duvall's brother, Jack Duvall, because you go to a convention of guys named Jack Duvall?
I actually once Googled myself for
Watch your mouth.
And I found out there were 44 Jack Duvalls in the United States. So
yeah, it's humbling.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
How many Norm Macdonald?
Well, when you YouTube and you go hey, man, I'll listen to a James Brown song, and instead it's a guy in his basement doing James Brown.
Right.
You're like, well, I didn't want this. Why is that number one?
Although those music videos are great, sometimes there's an unknown, and it's amazing what they're capable of.
Hey, Robert Duvall is an unknown in our next guest, Billy Joe Shaver's video. You know Billy Joe?
I remember Billy Joe.
Yeah, well, he does.
What's the matter with the clothes I'm wearing?
What?
Billy Joel, sure.
No, that's Billy Joel. Billy Joe Shaver.
Acting stupid.
So anyways, he was up for Gospel Album of the Year, and he has Robert Duvall as a walk-on. But Jack, thanks, man. You taught me a lot about Iran, and I bet a lot of dumb people in the audience that are as dumb as I am learned a lot of stuff too.
You can't be afraid to ask, because other people are thinking the same thing.
Well, it was a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack. You're a smart guy. Hey, listen, is Jack still there?
Well, you cut him off.
I had one question for him.
What? I'll answer it.
I was going to say, what is a guy like that?
We're wrapping it up.
We're wrapping it up. We'll be back on the Dennis Miller Show.